Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome. I hope you're having a wonderful Monday of Holy Week. Today is Monday, April 6th, in case you need a reminder. I told you during our worship service yesterday that I was going to be doing these daily devotions as we walk through Holy Week. And I'm going to be reading today from Mark chapter 11. So if you want to grab a Bible and follow along, I'm going to be reading Mark 11, starting in verse 12. We're going to be talking about Jesus cursing the fig tree and entering the temple in Mark chapter 11. But just wanted to touch base with you as we walk through this last week of Jesus' life on earth. Reading in Mark 11, verse 12, it says, "On the next day when they had returned from Bethany." So I want to stop there and give us a little context. The Gospel of Mark is the only one that gives us this timestamp. Now, as we celebrated yesterday, Palm Sunday, we remember Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem. He comes into the main city. They throw an impromptu parade. They celebrate his arrival. They tell us a little bit later that Jesus and his disciples then go on to Bethany. Bethany's a small city about 2 miles from Jerusalem. It would be equivalent to a modern-day satellite city. I remember when I was first starting the search process for the pastor position at Southminster, first reading about Gastonia and reading that it was a satellite city of Charlotte. Charlotte being the prominent metropolitan area, and these other cities, Concord, Kannapolis, Matthews, Gastonia, being satellite cities that connect to it. And if you think about the time it takes us to travel to Charlotte by car and the time it takes to travel from Jerusalem to Bethany by foot, it's probably pretty equivalent. And so we see these cities off of Jerusalem, the kind of hub, the center of all the activity and the action. And so during this last week, Jesus and his disciples, their home base is going to be Bethany, but they're going to travel in and out, back and forth to Jerusalem. And so what we have here in Mark 11:12 is what we call a timestamp. It says, on the next day after the triumphant entry, this would be Monday of Holy Week. Mark's the only gospel that gives us that time. We believe Mark is acting as Peter's scribe. And Peter would be, recounting and telling this story while Mark is writing it down. And so on the next day when they returned to Jerusalem from Bethany, it says he was hungry. Jesus was hungry. Seeing a fig tree from afar with leaves, Jesus went to see if perhaps he might find any food on it. When he came to it and found nothing except leaves, for it was not season for figs, Jesus said to the fig tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. Now, I used to read this story and think, oh, this poor little fig tree. Jesus, how could you? Just because it didn't have figs, you're going to curse this tree and it's going to be destroyed. We'll get to that tomorrow. But if that's your initial feeling, don't worry. This little fig tree, I'm sure it is in heaven. It is fine. It's okay. But it teaches us a significant point. One of the things I've learned along the way and since is that this story of this fig tree is not really about a fig tree. In fact, throughout the Old Testament, Israel, the nation of Israel, is referenced or illustrated as a fig tree. It happens several times. Several different prophets use this illustration to talk about Israel as a fig tree. And so this fig tree is really representative of God's people. Israel in the Old Testament, Christians in the New Testament, and today. So let's learn this lesson that the fig tree teaches God's people. Israel in the Old Testament, Christians today. Let's go back here and start again in verse 12. Jesus was hungry and saw a fig tree from afar with leaves. He went to see if perhaps he might find anything on it. So think about the details here. The first thing we read is Jesus is hungry. This makes sense. They've just completed a 2-mile journey from Bethany back into Jerusalem. But he's expectant. Jesus is hungry. Think about when you're hungry. You are expectant. You want to be fed. he sees this tree and he comes to it. He comes to this tree, which is his people, representative of his people, and he's expectant of them. He found nothing but leaves, for it was not season for figs. Now, think again about these details. Let's walk through this. What is it saying? A tree that is full of leaves, but has no fruit. Full of leaves mean everything looked good. Everything looked right, but there's a problem. There's no fruit. And it says, when he came to it, he found nothing except leaves, for it was not the season for figs. Now, think about this. It's not the season for this tree to be producing fruit. And yet Jesus is frustrated that this tree has no fruit. Now, think about the meaning here for God's people. If the tree is representative of God's people, Jesus comes to us expectantly, expecting us to bear fruit, but we have none. What would we say? Well, it's not season for fruit, right? What does this represent, this detail that it's not the season for fruit? An excuse, a reason why there's no fruit, right? And think about how when the Holy Spirit comes on us in conviction, expecting us to bear fruit, expecting us to be the hands and feet of Christ. And often, what is the first challenge we have? We come up with an excuse, right? I need to take care of myself. I don't have time to do this. I've got a lot of other things going on. I would if I could. The fig tree had a perfect excuse not to bear fruit. It wasn't season to bear fruit. It seems absurd that Jesus would expect the fig tree to bear fruit because it's not even season for fruit. And yet Jesus comes to the fig tree, representative, demonstrating his people, Israel in the Old Testament, Christians in the New Testament, us today, comes expecting us to bear fruit, in season or out. And it demonstrates here, Jesus said, I'm not really interested in excuses. Verse 14, Jesus said to the fig tree, may no one ever eat fruit from you again. And the disciples heard it. Think about that. Jesus saying, I'm not interested in excuses. I come to my people expecting them to bear fruit. I don't care if everything looks good. I don't care if the tree is full of leaves and everything looks good. What I really am concerned about is, are you bearing fruit? And if we're not, he's not really interested in the excuses we have for why we're not bearing fruit. And think about it. Jesus is very aware this is the last week of his life, this Holy Week. These are his last days on earth. He means business. It's time to step it up, time to drive home those points and the lessons he's been teaching his followers and disciples over the last 3 years. Time is of the essence. And note Jesus' emphasis here. When the times intensify, you shouldn't be worried about your self-sufficiency. The tree wasn't going to bear fruit for itself, right? The tree doesn't feed itself. A tree does not bear fruit for itself. The fruit a tree bears is inherently a blessing for others. In this instance, that fruit would glorify God and bless others. And so the point Jesus is making to his people that what he expects of us is that especially in intense and unusual times, that his people, in order to glorify him, are to bless others, to be a blessing, to bear fruit for others. Reading on in verse 15, and says, then they came to Jerusalem, Jesus and his disciples, continuing this journey from Bethany to Jerusalem. Jesus went into the temple and began to drive out those who sold and bought in the temple. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry any vessel through the temple. And he taught them and said, Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it a den of thieves. The scribes and the chief priests heard and looked for a way to kill Jesus, for they feared him, because all the people were astonished at his teaching. When evening came, he went out of the city. So there we have Monday of Holy Week. The tree and the cleansing of the temple. We're going to get into a little more detail of this tomorrow. I want to keep these devotions relatively short. I'm watching the timer on my phone here. I see I'm already at 10.5 minutes. So I want to keep these short, and we'll revisit tomorrow when Jesus revisits and his disciples revisit this fig tree and the temple and the fallout of this. But there's a big idea here. And what's happening on Holy Monday, Monday of Holy Week. Jesus is here, and he's laying claim to what is his, what belongs to him. First, his people, the fig tree, Old Testament Israel, New Testament believers. He's laying claim to what is his. And we as followers of Christ should be ready to bear fruit. No excuses. Doesn't matter the season. Doesn't matter how things look. The tree looks great. It's full of leaves. No fruit. That's the problem. Jesus isn't interested in how it looks. He's concerned, are we bearing fruit? And he's here to lay claim to what is his. First his people, then the temple. He says, this temple is my house. Pretty clear, he's laying claim to what belongs to him. You are my people. This is my house. It's time for business. This is the last week of Jesus' life. And when the times are tense and the stakes are high, Jesus is clear. He's laying claim. He's telling us what he expects. His people to bear fruit, to be a blessing. So I want to leave you with this challenge here on Holy Monday. How can you allow Christ to lay claim on your life? You are his. You are bought and paid with a price. Your eternity is secured by the price of his blood. You belong to him. You are heirs. Heirs, think about that. Inheritance of an eternal kingdom by the work of Christ. How can you allow Christ to lay claim on your life today? How can you allow him to lay claim on your words, your deeds, your actions, your meditations? Oh, here's where it gets tricky. Psalm 19, right? David writes, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be good and pleasing. He says, may God lay claim not just to the words that come out, the things that I do, but the meditations of my heart. See, that's next level stuff right there. That's where it gets really hard. A lot of us are okay with Christian behavior management. Right? We do a lot of behavior management. Let me just say nice words and do nice things, while inside I might be thinking all kinds of mean, evil, angry thoughts. God says that's not okay. Jesus wants to lay claim to your words, to your deeds, to your spirits, to your meditations. How can you surrender not just your outer life, your actions and your words, but your inner life, your spirit and your meditations, the meditations of your heart, the things you think about, the things that consume you, the things you perseverate on? How can you turn those over to Christ and let him lay claim to you wholly and completely? Friends, when we do that, we will bear fruit for Jesus, no matter what season, no matter what situation. Our lives will be good and pleasing, and our fruit will bless those around you. Have a wonderful Monday. God bless you.